All right, this is Thinker Be Eaten, and we're with Larry, the contractor guy, again. And he's been going through Nazism, and along with the ominous parallels, I mean, you have access to a lot of information, and we're not really happy about the fact that it looks like it's happening here, but it is. Now, what also happened was, with this whole thing that happened with my server and all the shows that were gone, the Nazi series Part 4 just disappeared. So what Larry's going to do today is reprise the long-lost Part 4, but he's also going to introduce what's going on today with something he wants to speak to. And I don't know. I mean, he just told me he wants to speak to the National Alliance and William Pierce and the boys. So, yeah, I don't know what's coming, but I'm happy to hear it. And, Larry, thanks a lot for coming back, and it's good to talk to you again.
It's great to be here. I was going to talk about an article about the neo-Nazis in 9/11. It's written by Jack McCarthy in Counterpunch magazine, 10/29/2001.
Yeah, it's a long time. I was wondering, yeah.
Yeah. At any rate, he said in the article, upon perusing his speeches from 1998 to 99, I discovered that Pierce, who heads the so-called National Alliance, did indeed utter some most interesting pre-9/11, if not prophetic, remarks about Osama bin Laden and bioterrorism. The running theme in Pierce's commentaries is, to paraphrase his hero Hitler, that Osama bin Laden's warning to America is I am coming, and so is bioterrorism. In one chilling commentary, Pierce, after noting that bin Laden and the rest of the lost generation of angry Muslim youth had it with their parents' compromises and were hell-bent on revenge against infidel America, issued this stark prophetic warning in a 1998 radio address titled, Stay Out of Tall Buildings, and quote, New Yorkers who work in tall office buildings, anything close to the size of the World Trade Center, might consider wearing hard hats, Pierce warned. Well, I brought this up to give you the actual quote from Pierce. We had talked about it earlier. It was talking about 9/11 and the neo-Nazi connections to it. I don't think Pierce would have made that statement if he didn't have some knowledge beforehand, or at least a very good hunch that the Islamic wing of the New World Order, the Islamic Nazi wing, would have something to do with domestic terrorism.
How do you come down on this? Do you have an opinion?
I do. I think that quite a long time ago that the Islamist, and this dates back to Egypt in the 1950s and even before that, the old Third Reich, which is morphing into the Fourth Reich, Hitler always had an idea that they could use the Muslims, the radical Muslims, to forward their aims. In other words, as proxy warriors. That's not to say that they really were totally behind the Muslims. They considered the Muslims also to be a quote trash race. In fact, Hitler once made a statement about the Muslims, or about Arabs, I should say, saying that they were, I think he described them as lacquered apes who need to be whipped. So you can see right there a little racism involved with that one. But yeah, I do think that they have connections with what I would call international fascism, or the Fourth Reich, or if you prefer, the New World Order. I think they have a very central place in it.
But that's also the case. Now, I want to mention, I forgot who did this. I used to have a great deal more respect for his research. I don't know that I do anymore. I don't know. I forget who it is. It'll come to me. And he, I don't know why I was even looking around for his stuff, but he had some chapter of his book in which it's called Proof that the Israelis knew 9/11 was going to happen in the 80s. Now, there were some comments made. I can't remember at the time. I don't know if it was Netanyahu that was mentioned. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, so it's in the 80s. And okay, it was kind of general in the sense that, someday, you may be attacked. They may attack New York. Well, okay, first of all, I'm not doubting that was said, but to go ahead and say that that is proof positive, I mean, that would not hold up in court. You know, and it's just that, and here's where I'm going with it. As you've heard me say, growing up around the towers when they're being built, every kid, and we were kids at the time when this started, like 14 or so, and we're like, and we watched them get bigger and bigger, and we all said the same thing. Someone's going to fly a plane into that. Because they begged almost, it was like somebody pointing to his big nose and say, go ahead, punch it. Someone's going to punch it.
Yeah.
But, and of course, when you see some of these things that I had up on my site a time ago, you know, about video games prior to to 2001, where a plane flies in it. You see, some of this is just that it looked like it was going to happen. People expected it to happen. They expected probably an airliner going off, on its approach, or on its approach like a JFK or LaGuardia. Okay, what am I saying? There's a certain understanding that America might get attacked one day, and what would be a good place, so to speak, to attack New York? Well, it would be New York or D.C. I think everybody would say that first.
Yeah.
So it was in, what do you want to call it, the collective consciousness, that this might happen. And some of these remarks, I think, evince that. And also, even if it's foreknowledge, then what I would say to me, Larry, I mean, weigh in on it yourself. To me, it's a script. And even if it's a radical Islam that's supposed to do it, that's the script. I mean, that's the way it is then.
Yeah, they're kind of using them as proxy warriors.
But
the Underground Reich, or the Fourth Reich as I see it, has an above ground and mostly an underground element. You know, it's kind of a virtual state. I mean, they don't have the necessarily the entirety of any nation's army to carry out their aims, but they have to carry out their aims to further the cause of the New World Order in some way. And radical Islam, as they've recruited people out of that to do what they need to do. It's awful complicated. I definitely don't have it all figured out, don't have any definitive answers. But the reason I think that Pierce knew something there and had been given some kind of foreknowledge of what was going to happen is because he seems to have had some kind of knowledge involved with terrorism in this country. Period. It's not a secret that Timothy McVeigh and company, as well as another Nazi terror group called the Order, had used his book, The Turner Diaries, sort of as a blueprint for the things that they were doing, domestic terrorism. And at the end of the Turner Diaries, the main character flies a small plane into the Pentagon. So I mean, it's like some of this stuff kind of foreshadows. It's just very strange, very odd. You know, he could foreshadow events, that were going to happen a few years down the line. And also, in 1998, I don't even think, not that I'm the most informed guy in the world, but I don't think Osama bin Laden was really on my radar, as far as like, I think, I don't remember what year the attack on the Cole took place, but I remember that he and his group were supposedly associated with that. And I know that the Mujahideen, in Afghanistan, he was definitely associated with that. But the idea of him and his group flying planes into large, tall buildings in New York, it's I don't know. It just seems, a little more than coincidence that he would say that.
Well,
that's just my opinion.
No. Well, that's what I asked for. I mean,
Yeah.
No, and one of the things too we've forgotten about. I don't know if the website's still there. You can go to Wayback Machine. I guess it's still there. But it was unansweredquestions.com or something. And there they had a speech. This is when this movement first started, and Catherine Austin Fitz was in it, and Kyle Hance and John Judge and these other people whom I've come not to trust.
Yeah.
But there was a speech given by the former, I believe at the time, former National Transportation Safety Board head. It's Mary Schiavo. And she makes a point about terrorism via airliner being more prominent than we really do remember.
Mm-hmm.
And flying into buildings being one of the modus operandi. And so that was there too. So what I'm wondering about, I'm not making an excuse of Pierce by any means, but you know what? I mean, even if you hate to say it, Pierce to me, I think was a pretty bright man.
Oh, he was extremely bright. He had a PhD in physics and used to teach at Oregon State University. You know, I mean, you don't get into a position like that unless you're a very intelligent person.
No, you know, and like I said, not that I went for it, but I will tell you this. Harry used to kid me and slide me National Alliance audios, you know, links and stuff, when Pierce was alive. And I'll have to admit it, he could carry it, and he didn't get, like, lost in some of this rhetoric.
Yeah.
Just, like you said, addressing issues and such. And I'll tell you what, I mean, I could listen to it, and of course, you know I love the line he came out with. It just had me howling. When he called Shrub, you know, what is it? What did I call it?
A feckless something or another.
Yeah, that's feckless, smirking nincompoop. And I'm like, that's all the basic.
He did have a funny voice too, that kind of a, you know, nasal type thing.
Yeah, he sounded like an old hatchet-faced guy, which he was.
Yeah.
But I mean, I could listen to that when the other dude took it over. I was like, goodbye.
Yeah.
But I think Pierce probably could put two and two together. Now, whether he knew something really was cooking, or if he had taken a look into Pandora's box, I don't know. I kind of think not. But remember, too, Larry, we said this before. There were thoughts in this country going on during World War II with those who wanted to begin a new country. And we said that's in the book Undercover by John Carlson. Mm-hmm. So who knows what was floating around here in the 40s.
Pierce was a leading light. He was a dedicated Nazi revolutionary. Hitler was his hero. He believed in the Third Reich, and he wanted to see a worldwide Reich. I mean, that was not only that, but Pierce was had developed his own sort of Gnostic style religion. You know, along the line, he was very much into the occult, and you know. He was a very powerful character. Not only that, but he had very powerful friends in Europe and especially in Germany, because the National Alliance and the German NPD, which is the new version of the Nazi Party in Germany, and it's getting stronger all the time. At any rate, Pierce had very close contact with those guys. When Pierce first started off, he was involved with Norman Lincoln Rockwell and the old goofy Nazi party that
George. Don't say Norman. Oh no. You'll have every art lover, which they really don't call that art, but no, that was George. Can you imagine if Norman Rockwell drew Nazi stuff like the Four Freedoms? How the hell would that look on the Saturday Evening Post?
Little Hitler Youth at the counter drugstore or something.
Yeah, right. Oh, what is that? What is that, a 45? Oh, there you go. I tell you, that's a...
No, I'm not talking about Norman Rockwell. It was George Lincoln Rockwell.
That's okay.
The thing was, Pierce got really fed up with them early on because he thought of them as basically being a bunch of stupid clowns. He didn't see a lot of, difference between them and the Klan, and he didn't want any part of that kind of, low-level, redneck,
Southern
knee-jerk, racism. He was wanting to put together a movement. He's a dedicated revolutionary, and a very bright guy. And the National Alliance is a pretty dangerous group, from what I understand. There are a lot of people in it that are similar to him, intelligent people who are professionals who, are dedicated to the cause.
Well, there's another one out there, a member of which used to email me, kind of regularly, and I forget what that group's called. And they got a pretty acerbic leader as well.
Yeah.
But at any rate, what I want to go back to is all I'm saying is this. I mean, and it goes back to was there a Pike Mazzini letter? If it was, they got it right. This is what we're headed for. Mm-hmm. The stuff we've done about the Vatican and Watergate, and stuff. I do believe there's a script, and I think you believe that as well.
Yes.
And
what I think they're wanting to see, once this Third World War takes place, and we've talked about that, and it's, pretty much cemented as far as I'm concerned that that's going to happen. when that takes place and the chaos and confusion that's going to result in America when everything starts breaking down, these people see themselves as taking over because they're organized and they're very well gunned up, and they have people within the American military that are in their groups, And there's not just one of them; there's several, but they'll probably fight it out amongst themselves eventually. Who knows? But they see themselves as taking over, and I don't think that's all that far-fetched. I think it would be possible.
Well, it goes back to, not to beat a dead horse, but two things. One, and that's Kissinger's smarmy comment, and back at Rodney King riots, that there'll come a time when Americans will beg for martial law.
Right.
I think he knows exactly what he's talking about, just like Brzezinski does. They're not prescient. They know the deal, and every so often they crack a smile and let it out and wonder if anybody has heard it. The other thing is, I still am very chilled by that book, The Meneses Chronicles, written under a pseudonym that comes out of the Rosicrucian order out in Pennsylvania, and looking at that scenario, saying our soldiers are gone, we have been invaded, and the only thing that stops it. Do you remember this at all, Larry?
Yeah, I remember you talking about it.
Okay. Yeah, and the only thing that stops it is that there is a geological cataclysm of such a import that all the invading armies want to go home and see if there's anything left of their countries. I'm telling you. And why? Because I think they're tuned into the evil one, and that makes sense to me. So America, people say, well, where can you go? And I would have to say you can't hide from what's coming, but certainly the United States is going to take it in the groin big time.
Well, I think eventually America is going to become, a province of sorts, an economic zone along with Canada and Mexico.
Oh, by the way, let me ask you something. I've been meaning to ask you that. I don't think I'm digressing really, but, I was watching the NASCO corridor. I was watching the website that those people put up in support and in, trying to do damage control. But we don't hear much about the NASCO corridor anymore, do we? And you're in Texas where that was supposed to start, the first leg.
Yeah.
Is there anything going on out there at all? Or?
As I understand it, yeah, they're working on it. But it's way down in South Texas around the border, which is quite a distance from where I live. But it's I know that there have been groups here in the state that are trying to stop it, and organizing meetings and so forth. And but I think eventually they're going to get that thing built. I don't know what stage it's in now. I'll do some research on it and find out if I can, where they stand with it. Well, but I mean, I-35 runs right through Austin, and I'm telling you, Biz, you talk about a congested. I mean, Houston or Los Angeles or Chicago doesn't have anything on I-35 in Austin anymore. I mean, it's a real mess. I mean, it's hard to get from north to south anymore.
I have to say one of the plums that Robert Burke pulled out, besides unveiling Chapman, with whom he was in contact with, and we don't go into that, but I mean, he called it right. The other thing he showed me was a news release from a Spanish construction group. I don't know if you remember this, called Grupo Ferrovial.
Right.
And while the NASCO corridor is saying, well, we're not building a new highway, a Grupo Ferrovial in this, construction like periodical, was bragging about, well, we're going to put in a new I-35.
Yeah.
And so you've got a Spanish construction group that was given the contract, who's saying exactly what they're doing, and then those chumps on the NASCO corridor website who were trying to defend it are saying, oh, no. So it is real. It seems not to have drawn the attention that it used to have in Patriot circles, but I don't know why some of these things fall on the back burner. I guess the attention span even in the Patriot community.
Something that made me very suspicious about 2 years ago maybe was our governor, our esteemed governor, Rick Goodhair Perry, was called in front of the Bilderbergers. And this was in the Dallas Morning News. So he couldn't lie his way out of it and say he didn't go. But he went in front of the Bilderbergers, and it was all kind of kept hush-hush, and then all of a sudden they broke the story. Nobody really knows what he talked to them about. But they said that he went and gave a speech on international law. Now, I don't know what Rick Perry knows about international law. You know, but what I'm thinking is it probably had something to do with the plans to amalgamate, the United States, Canada, and Mexico into an economic zone, and possibly it had something to do with the 35 corridor.
Where did he give the speech again?
He gave it in front of the Bilderbergers over in Europe, one of their meetings,
Okay.
I believe in 2008 or 9.
Okay.
It was in the Dallas Morning News. You could probably find it. I think I may have sent something to you about it
All right.
quite a long time ago, but it was real odd to me that Rick Perry, who to me is, just the consummate phony politician, but I never thought of him as any kind of expert on law. In fact, I don't even think he has a degree in law. So it was like, what I remember, I'll have to go check it out. What I remember of him was that, he's been involved with agriculture and that kind of thing, but that was, kind of his career path. I don't know what his degree's in. He went to A&M. But anyway.
Well, let me tell you what I find interesting also. This is probably a coincidence.
Yeah.
But it happened nonetheless. I don't think you were around in the days when I obtained a video from the University of Texas Law School.
Mm-hmm.
And they had as a guest speaker Dr. Anne-Marie Slaughter, who was, and she may still be, the head of the Woodrow Wilson School of Government in Princeton, New Jersey.
Right.
Well, she came out with a book at that time, flatly entitled "New World Order."
Wow.
We're not hiding this thing at all.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
she gives the speech, and she talked about what was being created as she spoke was international standards for law, regulatory, legislation, and judicial standards. So, and what happened was, even if you heard it, I'm telling you anyway. No, she was questioned afterwards. Raise your hand type of thing in the auditorium, and one guy got it, and he asked her 2 pointed questions, one and then a follow-up, and she was not comfortable.
Right.
And this is what she did, because I think internally she kind of panicked a little bit. And here's what she said about what he said is like, is this really a good idea? Doesn't that mean national sovereignty is lost? She goes, well, they're just in the talking stages. And you know, Larry, I'll say it, that is a bullshit throwaway line.
Oh my God!
Oh, and why?
Like it's okay. It's okay if we lose national sovereignty, but we're just talking about it now.
Right. So, that's all she could think about to throw a wet blanket on it, and it wasn't cool.
Oh my God!
And I just said, she wasn't ready for that. And whoever that guy was, and I tell you, it was funny because when the camera panned up, and he was a distance away. I mean, that's the way it looks on video.
Right.
He's kind of leaning to the side with his idea of like, man, you are so full of, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So at any rate, and that also happened in Austin.
Right.
So,
right.
So there you
Austin
go.
and Texas in general, and Austin, we're right on the front lines of what's going down. I mean, they're bringing that sucker. I-35, I really believe, is going to be, an international corridor, and it's perfect because it runs all the way from the Mexican border up to the Canadian border, and it's going to go across, both of those countries too.
Yeah, it's probably going to.
And believe me, the traffic on that thing, because all the loosening of the laws, allowing the commerce, and those trucks coming up from Mexico, man. I mean, they don't have the same standards for safety that we have here in the United States.
Yeah, you only need 3 lug nuts on each wheel.
Right. And I mean, it gets really dangerous out there.
Well,
where it goes.
Again, though, they were lying on their site, but it's going to be a separate I-35. And what I think you got, Larry, pretty much, it's going to be, you guys want to go local, you take the old I-35 for the transportation of goods. Here's where it's at.
Oh yeah, they're working on it all the time, Biz, but they don't talk about it as far as the I-35 corridor. They kind of avoid talking about that. They're putting all kinds of flyovers and they're doing things. I'm going to have to look into that now. Okay. I'll report back to you on that. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I see all this huge construction. I stay off of 35 if at all possible. Fortunately, I don't have to take it going to work, but my friends, people are always complaining about it, about how bad the traffic is. And people leave their homes like, 2 or 3 hours early sometimes just to, avoid having to deal with the really bad traffic. But anyway.
Well, I tell you what, God help him when he get to Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah, God help anybody going to Oklahoma.
Yeah,
okay, I don't want any letters.
Yes, there you go. I missed the turn. What? No, I missed the turn when we were trying to leave, in that famous story about going to Texas with Pilot Peter and Cute Paul. And, of course, we all were loaded, and as we drove north, I missed the turn. And it's like, here we are in Oklahoma, and I missed the turn.
Oh, man.
Oh, I think it was Coffeyville, which is famous for other hoodlums, but anyway.
Yeah.
All right, I don't know. I want to ask you one other thing, and then we can get back to the long-lost
Yeah, I'm sorry about getting a digression here.
Yeah. Well, who was a major contributor to that? Me? But here's what I wanted to ask you as well. There seemed to have been a very heavy connection between, how should I say this, World War I Germany, somehow, some way, and Islam. Mm-hmm. And then that seemed, at least on face, to not be the case, although I guess the trappings in certain elements were there. It didn't seem like it was as pronounced. I mean, obviously, Britain went to a long way to destroy the Ottomans down there. Mm-hmm. Also to tripartite, I guess it was Iraq at the time as well. And really just carve out some countries like Kuwait and Jordan and such. And yet there seems to have been this kind of like fealty between certain aspects of Islam and what would later be known as Nazis. But there was no military alliance, I don't believe, in World War II between them.
Not a formal one, but there was an alliance. Definitely, Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was basically a Nazi organization with an Islamic or Egyptian twist to it. And I'll get into that today, as a matter of fact. And even after the war, in the 1950s, many Nazis escaped into Egypt and were taken in by the government there. Nasser used quite a few Nazis as military advisors, etc.
When I went down to the pyramids, I always wondered what the deal was with those guys spelling Wiener Schnitzel down there. It didn't look like an Egyptian delicacy. But can you find anything, or did you come across anything, where Rommel got any kind of support from them, or
he got support from them from the standpoint of we're ready to help you, and whenever the time would be right, they had basically pledged themselves. The Muslim Brotherhood had pledged themselves to attack the British. One thing that's not probably known that much is that Nasser and Sadat both were Nazi agents. They were both working for the Third Reich and were spying on the British at the time, and that's how both of them came into prominence. They were both young military officers in the Egyptian army, and the Egyptian army was making plans to attack the British, kind of as a, well, I couldn't really call them a fifth column because it was their country, but
right.
But they were planning to start a revolution against the British and kill as many of them as they could, especially in Cairo, which was where the British headquarters was.
I just want to let you know, a little anecdote, which is really impressive for a lot of reasons, but the St. Petersburg Times came out with two big stories, and not that newspapers do that much anymore. That's why it was a little more impressive that it came out of the Times, which, unlike the Tampa Tribune, is not a complete 100% rag, but, it's getting closer. But there is a female reporter down there whose name escapes me right now, but she's the one that also found out that Tampa Airport lied about breaking the moratorium on 9/11 when they flew some of the Mideast royalty out of Miami.
Oh, yeah.
When
Osama bin Laden's family, nobody else could fly, but they could because they didn't want them to get hurt.
Well, yeah, and the thing
and they didn't even question them. The FBI did not question these people. Does that make any sense to you?
Given the way the game is rigged, yes. But you see, now you can lie so much about what's going on, and people knew that planes came into Tampa Airport. I mean, it's like flying an elephant overhead. You can't There's some things you can't hide.
Right.
And that woman from the St. Petersburg Times, good for her, called TIA out enough to the time when finally TIA admitted they did. But she is also the person who said, basically in print, bullshit to Daddy Bush's claims that Iraq was militarily building up on the Kuwaiti border. You remember that story?
Yeah.
She got access to a Russian bird that was looking down on the situation and said there is no build up there. Yeah. But she also stated that the precision of that image was so sharp that it also revealed she could see the tank tracks from Rommel's panzer divisions.
Right.
That's how crisp that was. I don't know if you ever heard that story, but I mean, I find that really impressive. And the other thing is this, and here we go again with, was Hitler crazy or was he handled? I mean, Rommel is kicking ass and taking names, and he calls them in. You remember that?
Well, part of what was going on there was that the British had broken the code, the Nazi code. They had the Enigma machine, and they'd broken the code, and they were able to just wipe out Rommel's supply lines. Plus, American tanks had started arriving, so it gave Montgomery something of an advantage there. And after a while, he started, kicking Rommel's butt. But he couldn't get supplies. If he had had supplies, I don't think Montgomery would have ever beaten him, because he was just Rommel. From everything I've ever read or heard, was just a brilliant tactician. He knew when to attack and how, and he had a great ability to assess his enemy and know where their weaknesses were, and he gave the British everything they could handle.
It almost reminds me of when Truman called in MacArthur, because
right.
MacArthur didn't play by the playbook. He went in and kicked some booty, and he wasn't supposed to do that. Bang, you're gone. And that's what just reminded me of the relationship between Rommel and Hitler. And wasn't Rommel? Do you remember? Was Rommel in on the Valkyrie plot?
Well, he was accused of being in on it. He didn't know about it. The problem with Rommel was that he was one of those people who wanted to just remain an officer and stay out of politics altogether. He had learned to despise Hitler because he thought Hitler was leading the country down.
Well, he was
down the path to destruction. So what they did is they found out that his name was mentioned. They found his name, and they went to him, and two officers came to his house and told him, look, he was convalescing from an injury. He had been shot up by a British plane, and his Jeep had been, and he had gotten hurt. And they told him, you can either commit suicide, or we will have a trial and convict you and hang you, and we will kill your family. So Rommel took what he considered to be the
Roman way out.
Yeah, he went ahead and committed suicide. He drove off with these two guys, shot himself, and then to make add insult to injury, the Third Reich made this big funeral where he was the great hero and all that, and they covered up everything. But basically, he was forced to commit suicide.
So I'll always believe. I believe the story that we saw in The Longest Day, when the reason why the invasion was more successful is because Hitler didn't want to be awakened from his nap, or the soldier was. Look, that may be the story, but I'm not believing that. And if it is the story, if that's what they told people, it's because, again, here we have a rigged situation.
Well, look at Dunkirk. If Hitler said, "Oh yeah, we'll have Goering and his fighter bombers, his dive bombers will take care of the British Navy, and he'll bomb the guys on the beach, etc." Well, all he had to have done to really just wipe them out was to throw the Panzers against them. They had them ready to go, but they didn't use them. So that never made a lot of sense. There was a lot of things about the war that just didn't make sense, especially from Hitler's viewpoint.
Larry,
but I really don't know.
You start to wonder, though. Starting back with the Civil War, which is all right, was here. There's a little bit more information available, and it looks like there was a fighting not to win.
Yeah.
They call it blunders, but now I'm starting to think blunders are when the powers that be decide, this is not going the way we want it to, so do something stupid. And I mean, we see it with Napoleon. World War I guess there's cases. I'm really not clear on it. But in World War II, I mean, some of the stuff that happened, it was like, what? And I mean, even in the end, Adolf, why are you sending the troops into Russia right about fall? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, is that a little nuts? Yes, it is. Yeah. And so, again, I thought for a second that Rommel was either too successful, and here's where I'm going with this as well. Think about what happened with Patton.
Right.
Patton, too successful, mind of his own, gets into a Jeep accident. No, he was killed. I mean, he was murdered.
Yeah, he had a tendency to run his mouth too much, and he was becoming an embarrassment to the people at the top, and he had to go. I mean, I see Patton as the kind of guy, he might have retired and started, telling everything he knew,
Oh yeah, definitely.
And that's the kind of person he was. I wouldn't say he was fearless, but he was pretty close to it, and he just didn't give a damn. He would say what he thought, and unfortunately, for him, he was just a little had too big a mouth, and I think they offed him.
He was. I mean, you heard that anecdote about the author Jimmy Bishop.
Yeah.
Who wrote the books The Day Lincoln Died, The Day Christ was Crucified. He had that series,
right.
And he was the uncle of a friend of mine who said, "I can't understand. They said he was killed in a Jeep accident, but I saw him under guard in a hospital with MPs on the door, and he died there." Okay, fine. But it also reminds you, too, of characters like Patton and Custer, who had this hubris. We saw that a little bit in a fictional sense, in the movie Apocalypse Now with the Robert Duvall character, who was sitting there, gesticulating and talking about surfing when the bombs were coming in, and people were diving for cover, and he just stood there. And
it was the same guy who said there's nothing like the smell of napalm in the morning.
It's like victory. But the point was clear. I mean, there's a hubris, but the problem with Patton, Patton didn't get his guys killed, Custer did. So not a good move. But it's true, like they said in that movie, you knew he was going to get through this without a scratch on him. Yeah. And he just knew it, and he was trying.
Yeah, I don't know. You've probably seen the movie with George C. Scott playing Patton.
Yep.
And I thought that was one of the better movies I've ever seen about a military figure. It's really, really good.
And it's funny, you call him George Patton because he actually became that character in the end.
Well, he did. He was an amazing individual. Another great movie that he made that along the same lines was The Formula. I know I've probably talked about that before. And it's a fictional story about a detective whose friends are killed, and they're connected to the whole idea of the Nazi war machine when it was making synthetic gasoline, and how there was a formula that was needed to crank it up and do that again. They did make synthetic gasoline out of coal. Did.
And you're not going to believe it, but I was going there right now.
Okay.
Because one of the stories I read, and this is like 1973 gas crisis thing.
Right.
And I never thought about it, was that when Patton apparently was chasing the Nazis back, east, he was using gas from their own vehicles.
Right.
And it was synthetic gas. And it's like, does anybody, are you walking away with any kind of thought about this? There you go. Absolutely. The formula. Right. So.
Right. If you ever get a chance to see that movie, do, because it's fictional, but it really tells a lot about what's going on in the world today.
Just like Boys in Brazil, you'd have to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's fictional, but it's
telling you a lot.
It's not a lie,
Just like Godfather 3, which nobody seems to like.
Yeah, anyway. Why is that? I mean, they like the other two. What was the element there? I mean, what was the group or the factor that...
I don't know. I mean, it couldn't be the priest.
Yeah, you just don't mess with the Vatican. People get upset. Well, there it goes.
It's not nice to fool with the Vatican.
Yeah.
All right, so there we are. And you said that this is leading us back into the Long Lost Four.
Yeah, I'm going to get back into the idea of the Vatican rat lines here.
Okay.
And I'll start off with a piece that was written by Carl Oglesby. It's the Secret Treaty of Fort Hunt. And he says, William Shire closed his 1960 masterpiece, the rise and fall of the Third Reich with the judgments that the Nazi regime had passed into history. But we cannot be so confident today. On the contrary, the evidence as of 1990 is that World War II did not end as Shire believed it did, that Nazism did not surrender unconditionally and disappear, that indeed it finessed a limited but crucial victory over the Allies, a victory no less significant for having been kept a secret from all but the few Americans who were directly involved. But Martin Bormann, who was even more powerful than Himmler, did not accept the premise of the separate peace idea. Bormann was an intimate of Hitler's, the deputy Fuhrer and the head of the Nazi Party, and thus superior to Himmler in rank. Bormann wielded additional power as Hitler's link to the industrial and financial cartels that ran the Nazi economy, and was particularly close to Hermann Schmitz, who was chief executive of IG Farben, the giant chemical firm that was Nazi Germany's greatest industrial power. With the support of Schmitz, Bormann rejected Himmler's separate peace strategy on the ground that it was far too optimistic. The Allied military advantage was too great, and Bormann believed for Roosevelt to be talked into a separate peace. Roosevelt, after all, had taken the lead in proclaiming the Allies' demand for Germany's unconditional surrender and total denazification. Bormann reasoned, rather, that the Nazis' best hope of surviving military defeat lay within their own resources, chief of which was the cohesion of tens of thousands of SS men for whom the prospect of surrender could offer only the gallows. Bormann and Schmitz developed a more aggressive, self-contained approach to the problem of the looming military defeat, the central concept of which was that large numbers of Nazis would have to leave Europe and, at least for a time, find places in the world in which to recover their strength. The international organization created to accommodate Bormann's plans is most often called the Odessa, a German acronym for Organization of Veterans of the SS. It has remained active as a shadowy presence since the war and may indeed constitute Nazism's most notable organizational achievement. But we must understand that none of Bormann or Skorzeny and Schacht's well-laid plans would have stood the least chance of success had it not been for a final component of their organization, one not usually associated with the Odessa at all, but very possibly the linchpin of the entire project. The final element of the Odessa was the so-called Gehlen organization, the organization, the Nazi system, intelligence system that sold itself to the U.S. at the end of the war. It was by far the most audacious, most critical, and most essential part of the entire Odessa undertaking. The literature on the Odessa and that on the Gehlen organization, however, are two different things. No writer in the field of Nazi studies has yet explicitly associated the two, despite the fact that General Reinhard Gehlen was tied politically as well as personally with Skorzeny and Schacht. Moreover, Gehlen's fabled post-war organization was in large part staffed by SS Nazis who were positively identified with the Odessa. Men such as the infamous Franz Alfred Six and Emil Augsburg of the Wannsee Institute. An even more compelling reason for associating Gehlen with the Odessa is that without his organization as a screen, the various Odessa projects would have been directly exposed to American intelligence. If the CIC, Counterintelligence Corps, and the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, had not been neutralized by the Gehlen ploy, the Odessa's Great Escape scheme would have been discovered and broken up. Gehlen cleared his operations with Admiral von Dönitz and General Franz Halder, his former chief of staff. This indicates that the German chain of command was still in place while Gehlen was going to work for the U.S. As Gehlen was about to leave for the United States, he left a message for Bonn, with another of his top aides, Gerhard Wessel. I am to tell you from Gehlen that he discussed with Dönitz and Halder the question of continuing his work with the Americans. Both were in agreement. Well, you can see right there that the plan to get the Nazis, the SS people, out of Europe, which was made quite some time before the end of the war, and that Martin Bormann and eventually Reinhard Gehlen were two of the prime movers as far as that went. I have something here to read from a book by Jim Marrs. I know you've had Jim Marrs on the show before.
Mm-hmm.
And I like Jim. probably not the greatest writer in the world, but a good one, I think. And he wrote a book about, I think, 3 or 4 years ago called The Rise of the Fourth Reich. And he has some commentary here I'd like to present. With Kennedy dead and Lyndon B. Johnson in the White House, the Nazification of the United States moved ahead largely unhindered. During the Johnson years, the president was surrounded by a coterie of advisors, collectively known as his wise men. All were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. These included John J. McCloy, Averell Harriman, Dean Rusk, William Bundy, Dean Acheson, George F. Kennan, and Robert A. Lovett. By the early 1960s, the Council on Foreign Relations, Morgan and Rockefeller interests, and the intelligence community were so extensively interbred as to be virtually a single entity, remarked Professor Donald Gibson. With young people, the media, and members of Congress fixated on the Vietnam War, few people were aware of the growing power and influence of the military and the immense war machine assembled behind it. Not that this war machine was designed to actually win battles. On the contrary, it was designed to suck tax dollars from the public treasury, centralize power in the government and its corporate sponsors, and to spread the new Reich's influence across the globe. Under the banner of freedom and democracy, yet pursuing the agenda of the globalists who supported the Nazis, the United States slowly turned from one of the most admired nations in the world to one of the most despised. William Blum, a former State Department employee turned author, stated, "From 1945 to 2003, the United States attempted to overthrow more than 40 foreign governments and to crush more than 30 populist nationalist movements fighting against intolerable regimes. In the process, the United States bombed some 25 countries and caused the end of life for several million people and condemned many millions more to a life of agony and despair." And goes on later in this same chapter to talk about G. Gordon Liddy. In early 1974, while President Nixon was desperately trying to find a way out of impending impeachment, G. Gordon Liddy, ringleader of the break-in at the National Democratic Party headquarters, was preoccupied with Nazi imagery. Liddy had named the Watergate plumbers after that vast, secretive organization that helped Nazis escape both Europe and justice after the war. Our organization had been directed to eliminate subversion of the secrets of the administration. So I created an acronym using the initial letters of these descriptive words. Odessa appealed to me because when I organize, I'm inclined to think in German terms. And the acronym was also used by a World War II German veterans organization belonged to by some acquaintances of mine. Wasn't that special? Liddy has some Nazi friends. Liddy wrote in his 1980 book, Will, the autobiography of G. Gordon Liddy. According to author Edward J. Epstein in 1971, Liddy invited a number of White House officials to view Nazi propaganda films to, quote, demonstrate how a few determined men could manipulate the emotions of an entire nation by invoking a few highly visual symbols of fear. These Nixon officials included John Ehrlichman, Eagle Crow, Don Santarelli, and Robert Mardian. The cycle of films was climaxed on June 13th by the showing of Triumph of the Will, a Nazi propaganda film made under the auspices of Hitler and Goering, which graphically depicted the way a national will could be inculcated into the masses through the agency of controlled fear and frenzied outrage, reported Epstein. Well, I've seen Triumph of the Will. It's a very famous film. Leni Riefenstahl, who was a documentary filmmaker and a very good one, was approached by Hitler and the higher-ups in the Third Reich to produce a propaganda film for them for their Nuremberg rally, I think in 1935 or 6. At any rate, it's a really chilling film, and how anybody would want to see that and be appreciative of that kind of shows you the mindset of people like G. Gordon Liddy and the rest of the Nixon White House there. Paul Manning also wrote, the German South American group also had direct access to the Nixon White House through their representatives in Washington and were proud of the fact that B.B. Rebozo was President Nixon's closest friend. for knowingly or unknowingly, Rebozo processed millions of their dollars through his Florida bank as part of normal commercial operations. So in other words, the old Nazis that were down in South America were definitely in contact with and had access to the White House through B.B. Rebozo and probably other people too, for that matter.
Well,
and Rebozo was laundering money for them in Miami.
Well, Rebozo was like Nixon's familiar spirit.
Yeah, sure
you
was.
You remember that?
Yeah.
You also mentioned two names that I really think people should not let escape. And I dealt with this a long time ago, and I wanted to get back to it because something else was swinging when these characters held sway. One of them is George Kennan, whose protege is James Burnham. People should read about that because although they came on as Cold War warriors, pro-U.S., I think they actually created the whole Soviet thing. And in saying that, I'm wondering if they weren't also a little lefty themselves. For as whatever much that meant to the United States to move it again closer to socialism, as Russia is also moved a little bit the other way, supposedly, towards capitalism. I mean, we all understand we're going to the same system. Is that correct?
Well, the way I see it is we're going into the beast system, which will be collectivism, and you'll have a controlled economy. Well, when you get down to it, both Nazism and communism, both are controlled economies. They're totalitarian states, run by elites.
But so, Larry, it's quite the case, though, that ours was also controlled, a planned economy, though they called it something else.
Yeah. Well, Roosevelt started that in the 1930s. I mean, I think you're familiar with Giovanni Gentile, who was the kind of the overall philosopher of fascism under Mussolini. Gentile was a professor, I believe, at the University of Palermo. He was an intellectual, and he came up with the basic ideas of both political and economic of fascism. And it was a controlled economy, and they took his ideas. They read his stuff. The people on Roosevelt's staff read his stuff, and used some of his ideas, especially the idea of using tax dollars to make work, as in which they came up with all the WPA projects, etc.
Real quickly, because this should not be lost either. We had a professor at Fairleigh, get me back in New Jersey, time warp. No, St. Leo's, by the name of Lance Tillman. Yeah. And Lance didn't play nice with all the other professors. He was his own guy. He also was in Navy intelligence, so Lance knew the way the world worked.
Oh, yeah.
And academics don't like that because they want to believe it's the way they write it.
Well, naval intelligence is the first intelligence operation in America.
Thou shalt be no other intelligence operation.
Yeah.
But Lance just was a really vivacious guy, and he wanted to learn stuff, and we had him on twice. And he would also talk to Harry and I. And the one thing I lament so much, because I lost contact with him, knowing Lance, though, this is not surprising. I found out that he's off in Kazakhstan.
Uh-oh. Wonder what he's doing there.
He's a professor over there? No, well, he's supposed to be a professor.
Well, it's a tourist spot. I mean, a lot of people retire there.
I'm afraid Lance might get retired there.
Yeah, he might.
But dig this, and I don't know if you heard it or not, but I mean, Lance comes in one day, and I mean, he's a big man. He kind of looks like he looks like one of the Bridges. Was it Jeff Bridges that's out now doing that, that country western thing? He's that big. He has that presence. And Lance comes over and he calls Harry and Over and I in the reference area, and he says to us, I've just been looking at something. I've just been playing around with this, but I'm starting to find some kind of chord here. And I was like, all right, what's going on? And he starts talking to us, and all I remember him saying is that from 1973 to the present, he said, for all intents and purposes, we've had a planned economy.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what's interesting about that, in the time that I was doing my schoolwork to get a second degree in English and to get certified to teach, I had to take some courses, and across them all, whether it was education or sociology or psychology, the year 1973 pops up in all of them. It keeps repeating. And these are not, this is not necessarily political writings. And They were saying that in 1973, is the time when the rising of, let's say, the income of the upper crust no longer raised the lower boats with it. It was a time when there was a clear dichotomy that the rich were getting much richer. We know that, we understand that saying. But now it really was a great difference. Another sociological book comes in and says in 1973 began a time of what Durkheim called anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E, rootlessness. And there was a rootlessness and there was a transigence that started to settle in to America.
Right.
73 was also when we kicked the gold standard completely to the curb, I believe. I mean,
I think it was 73 with Nixon.
Yeah, I mean, they told everybody you're not going to get your money in gold, and that's the way it goes.
Right.
And there again, you look at an event almost like 1932 or so, with the Banking Act of 33, where it's like, okay, well, you stupid Americans who are really patriotic and love us, bring your gold and silver in, assholes. It's the last money you'll ever see. Mm-hmm. And, of course, they did it. We understand that. And then what do they get for the rest of their lives? Promissory notes known as Federal Reserve notes.
Yeah.
So 73, I mean, Larry, it's incredible because...
It's a pivotal year.
Yes, it is. And it's the one that makes the least noise almost.
Right.
And
I think you're right. Like there are certain pivotal years in history, and especially history of the United States. Like 1932 was a pivotal year, 1945, and I think 1973 as well. And there's probably others I haven't thought of. But.
And remember, they kicked us in the groin at the end of 73 into 74 with the first manufactured gas crisis.
Right. Right.
And folks, really, I mean, Harry said this to me a long time ago, and I agree. They want $7 out of us. And the reason why that 7 is a golden number, $7 per gallon gas, is because that puts us basically in line with Europe and other countries. Mm-hmm. That's what they want us to pay. What that's going to do to an economy that's already going down the toilet, you hear that flushing sound, we are screwed for this coming year or two. All right, so anyway, I wanted to mention that. The other thing I want to get to real quick, and we're going to break here as we're coming up to an hour. Here's what I'm wondering about. I'll give this much to John Coleman, who I want to trust, but again, a lot of it's anecdotal. But I can believe that Haig and Kissinger worked on Nixon to destabilize him over that botched robbery. Mm-hmm. Haig also and Kissinger were around to tell the world when Reagan was shot that it was no conspiracy.
Right.
Okay.
And Haig happens to have been a Knight of Malta.
Say it isn't so, Larry. Say it isn't so.
It's true.
But here's what's interesting, I think. Liddy, and I'll tell you what, I respect Liddy. I mean, if I had to get into an alley fight, I'd want Liddy with me. Mm-hmm. That guy had a lot going for him, and I will tell you also...
He's a mean SOB, that's for sure.
And he was, I think his training was Jesuitical, but Liddy went to jail, and so did some other guys. And I'm wondering if there wasn't this little fist fight going on under Nixon's regime that would continue through Reagan's and Daddy Bush's, where the Eastern establishment was kind of getting moved out of the way, that, quote, Eastern establishment, which would have been Kissinger and Haig. Kissinger, I think, was probably the one that, what would you say, military minds had the least respect for, because, I mean, you know, what is he here for anyway? You know what I mean? I mean, what is your claim to fame? But those two guys...
he's Rockefeller's main man. I mean, he's one of Rockefeller's main men, I'll put it that way.
So they destabilized Nixon, but Liddy and another bunch of guys are willing to swing for it. Colson, Magruder, I think, went also.
Yeah.
Dean. All right, so they went to Club Fed, but still in all, they went ahead and did it. And I'm wondering if that showed some kind of split that would continue through the GOP. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean... They all
maybe.
Well, I mean,
your comment about the Eastern establishment and the Sun Belt guys. The author that I was talking about earlier, Carl Oglesby, he wrote a book called The Yankee and Cowboy War, where he was saying that there was a big the elites in this country are split along the lines of the Eastern establishment and the Sun Belt, and Well, California, Texas, the southern states versus the eastern establishment.
And, when you think about this, it's almost as if a transition took place under Daddy Bush. Why? because Daddy Bush was Eastern Establishment / Nazi. Mm-hmm. But he also was a chameleon that I actually made fun of before I ever knew anything was really going on. It's like, okay, what state do you come from, man? Are you from Texas or are you from Maine? You know, what is it?
Actually, he's from Connecticut. We don't claim
That's
him
right.
here in Texas. At least I don't.
No, but he dropped his eggs. He dropped his eggs there.
Yeah, I know.
Which became Jeb.
Well, actually, Shrub was born in Connecticut.
Shrub was?
And I'm proud of that.
Yeah, right. A true Connecticut Yankee.
I have no idea where the rest of them were born.
But they went to school down by you.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, but you see what's happening here? It's almost if there's an amalgamation now.
Oh, yeah.
And a softening of the lines, or at least the showing to the curb of Haig and Kissinger. And now you have the Eastern Establishment, but under like this Nazi umbrella that's now embraced the center of this country, which, I mean, what is Jeb and George associated with? Texas. Although Jeb came down here to Florida. Explain that to me as well.
Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, they go down. I mean, they had. There's a populous state in the South. Oh, I think we'll go there so we can become governor of that state. So we'll have the two most populous states in the South and Southwest.
Yeah, and too that also saw a time, and I'm not blaming this on anybody, but clearly. At some point, I assume the 80s, it was a weakening. In the 90s, it was probably close to moribund, and there was no more Dixiecrat bloc in the Southeast. That was done. And Florida was one of those states where it happened. So, all right, listen, we're going to bring it to a pause here at an hour, and we'll pick it up round 2.